Welcome, everybody. My name is Anton
Good
Korinek. I'm a
morning, everyone.
professor of economics at the University of Virginia, and I lead the CEPR's new research and policy network on the economics of artificial intelligence. This webinar series will explore the transformative implications of AI. We will focus on the ongoing rapid AI advances and their far-reaching implications for our economies and societies. We will examine the effects of AI on productivity and the potential for labor market disruption, the safety implications, the competition dynamics, and many other aspects. Separately, we will also look at the methodological implications of rapid AI progress for economic research. To formally kickstart our webinar series, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing the CEPR's Vice President, Helene Ray. Helene is a renowned economist and professor at the London Business School. Her research, which I actually had the pleasure to follow very closely before my interest shifted to AI a decade ago, focuses on global capital flows, exchange rates, and financial stability. She is widely celebrated for her groundbreaking work, including for being the first one to identify the global financial cycle. Thank you, Helene, for your and the CEPR's support of this webinar series and for joining us for our kickoff event. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Anton. And good morning, good evening, everyone. As Anton said, so the CEPR is a think net of more than 1,500 researchers who is devoted to fostering the highest quality research in economics on a variety of topics, and also to disseminating research widely to policymakers and to decision makers in general. So given this mission and this background, I guess it is absolutely no surprise to any of you that CEPR is extremely happy to inaugurate this webinar series on AI. It is indeed quite difficult these days to open the news or to hear anything but about AI and the impact of AI on the stock market, up and down, or also the impact of AI, obviously, more seriously on the structural changes in our societies. We definitely need a lot of research in this new area and in this spirit. We are therefore extremely happy to have Anton Korinek spearheading this initiative on AI on behalf of CEPR and this Research Policy Network, and to inaugurate this series. So Anton, now the floor is yours for all the scientific content. Thank you very much and have a great seminar series.
Thank you so much, Helene. I'll start with some housekeeping. Our webinars will meet about once a month, generally on Tuesdays, and are scheduled for 60 minutes. For the first part, the first 45 minutes today, we will have invited presentations and discussions today with Ajay Agrawal and Eric Brynjolfsson. The following 15 minutes are reserved for open discussions with you, the live humans and AI participants of this webinar. I'm inviting all of you to submit questions using the Q&A facility, and I will promote some of you to the stage to tell us your questions during the open discussion part. And I should also emphasize the seminars are being live streamed and recorded. So if you speak during the seminar, you will be part of that recording and accessible on YouTube. If you do not want that, you can still pose questions, but add in all caps text only in your question or comment, and then I'm happy to read it for you. And a quick disclaimer, the objective of this webinar series is to provide economic analysis and insights to inform economists, policymakers, and the public, not to engage in public policy advocacy. And now, let me turn the topic of our webinar to the economics of transformative AI, a research agenda. And I will share some slides on that. So I have the pleasure of introducing Ajay and Eric, who have co-authored this piece with me on the topic that we're going to speak about today. I'll start with Ajay. Ajay Agrawal is the Geoffrey Tabor Chair in Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. He is the founder of the Creative Destruction Lab there, which is a program that has significantly advanced the commercialization of science-based AI ventures in Canada. Professor Agrawal's research focuses on the economics of artificial intelligence, and he's an author of the acclaimed book Prediction Machines: The Simple Economics of AI. Welcome, Ajay.
Thank
And
you, Anton.
Eric Bjørnulfsen is the Cherry Yang and Akihiko Yamazaki Professor and Senior Fellow at Stanford University, where he founded the Digital Economy Lab at the Institute for Human-Centered AI. His pioneering research on the economics of information and AI has significantly influenced our understanding of how technology impacts both productivity and the future of work. And he's also a best-selling author known for works such as The Second Machine Age. Welcome to you as well, Eric.
Thank you, Anton.
So Ajay, Eric, and I have each followed the progress in AI for more than a decade. In fact, Ajay organized an NBR event back in 2017 on the economics of AI, after which he edited an NBR volume to which all three of us have contributed. And that volume has kind of laid out a research agenda for the economics of AI. So Ajay, can you share why we have reached the point where it has become necessary to define a new research agenda on the economics of transformative AI?
Sure. Well, thanks very much, Anton, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so this was organized with Joshua Gans and Avi Goldfarb in 2017, and we invited a number of people to come. At that time, very few economists. In fact, maybe it was largely just Anton, you, and Eric were the only ones. I'm sure there were a couple of others, but the vast majority of people who came to that conference in 2017 had not done anything on artificial intelligence. And I just dug out when you asked me to comment on this. It resulted in this book, which is a collection of essays that was written in 2017 to lay out a research agenda in economics. And I found the letter that we sent to the people who received the book, and it said, "Dear colleagues, in 1956, a group of computer scientists gathered at Dartmouth College for a workshop on artificial intelligence. It was an 8-week brainstorming session. Today, that gathering is widely considered to be the founding event of artificial intelligence as a field. A lot has happened in AI since then, in computer science. However, in contrast, and despite the significant economic implications that many expect will result from this technology, in the field of economics, we had largely ignored the phenomenon." So in early 2017, Joshua Gans, Avi Goldfarb, and I sent an email to some of the world's leading economists inviting them to write a paper laying out the key issues and questions regarding AI and their area of expertise. AI in productivity, AI in education, AI in economic growth, AI in innovation, etc. We then invited them to come to Toronto that autumn, where together we would discuss, debate, and critique each other's ideas. We'd brainstorm. We'd lay out a research agenda for the economics of AI. For the field of economics, Toronto would be our Dartmouth. To our surprise and delight, almost everyone we invited said yes. They wrote their chapters, offered critiques, received feedback, brainstormed, and then returned home and revised their chapters. The result is this book. It's hot off the press. We hope you enjoy it. And that was this. And so then, Anton, your question to me was, why do we need another one? It's roughly 8 years, and I think there's three things. The first thing is the timelines. That I remember being at a meeting that Eric co-organized in Puerto Rico in 2014, and at that time he asked the room. He did a survey on when do people think that we'd arrive at something along the lines of what we're calling transformative AI, machines that are able to do most work. And I would say the median, Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the median timeline was somewhere between 2075 and 2100. There was a few people, and this was like 50% chance or higher of achieving that level of technology by that date. There was a couple of people, I think Rich Sutton was an outlier. There was a couple of outliers who were saying some earlier dates. Whereas now, many people, serious people in the field, are saying dates like 2030, and some even earlier, of like having some reasonable probability, 50% chance of achieving that. So number one is timeline. The timelines have changed. Number two is, I remember in that 2017 conference, Eric opened up his presentation, and then for the next 5 years, most economists open their presentations with a picture of the results from ImageNet. And because that was the thing everyone referenced as to try and prove to people, hey, this is a real technology. And they showed ImageNet, that's a graph of the error rate of recognizing images, and showing that, in 2010, it was roughly 30%. And then there was a sharp drop in errors in 2012 with the introduction of deep learning. And then it was gradually getting better and better until it reached human level in sort of 2018. But that was our reference point. Today, when we talk about AI, I don't see any more references to the ImageNet numbers. In other words, we've had such significant technological advance in many other modalities that is no longer the reference point. The third thing is we've cracked language, and I think cracking language has opened up so many, both in terms of the interface with the machine, as well as the capabilities of the machine. Even though it's still under the hood, it's still all computational statistics that does prediction. That hasn't changed. Applying it to language has, I think, changed a lot. So for these reasons, the timeline, the multimodality, and language, that the way that we're thinking about the economics of this technology, it feels to me it's become not just sort of marginally different, it's qualitatively changed. And obviously I'd be keen to hear what both of you think, but it feels like it's probably a good time to revisit the agenda setting for this technology.
Yeah, very much. And I think the move from other modalities to language is what has made these systems able to be general purpose AI. And I think that has been one of the fundamental game changers. So in our research agenda, we faced the question, before we want to talk about the economics of transformative AI, we need to somehow pin it down a little bit more, because it is a somewhat vague concept. And for that, I wanted to turn it over to Eric, and I wanted to ask you, Eric, how can we best operationalize this term transformative AI, and how does it relate to other concepts that are floating around, like artificial general intelligence or human level AI?
Sure. Well, the three of us are economists, and what we see as the big gap right now is the economic understanding of these implications. Thanks to our smart and hardworking colleagues in computer science and AI, there's been tremendous progress, as Ajay just outlined, in the underlying capabilities. And there's some discussion about how you define those capabilities. But now the gap has gotten to be larger and larger between what those capabilities and our understanding of those technologies versus our understanding of the economic implications. So we want to come up with a definition that focuses more on the economic implications, and to distinguish it from, say, AGI, artificial general intelligence, or human level intelligence, we've been using the term transformative AI. Holden Karnofsky had a definition back in 2016 that defined transformative AI as AI that drove a change comparable to the Industrial Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution. And I think that is the kind of thing we're aiming for. That said, for our purposes, it's a little bit circular, because if we want to understand the economic implications, then saying a technology that has these economic implications is sort of a bit tautological. So we've been using a more specific definition, at least in our work, and we've been encouraging people to use it when they write papers as part of our upcoming volume. And it draws very heavily on Dario Amode's recent essay, Machines of Love and Grace. In it, he starts the essay defining something he calls powerful AI. He also doesn't want to use AGI or transformative AI. And powerful AI, I mean, he goes in a page or two describing it, but in brief, you can summarize it as a country of geniuses in a data center. So this is not like omniscient and omnipotent, but it's quite powerful. It's a lot of, say, 140 IQ experts who have studied all the literature in a particular field and are very good at that. And they're in a data center, a whole country of them, millions of them. They have some limited ability to change the outside world. They can perhaps, control robots and whatever, but he doesn't assume, omnipotent powers of robotics as yet. Although, obviously geniuses can invent a lot of things that might be quite remarkable to us. So that's the definition that we've been using as our concrete definition, this country of geniuses in data center or powerful AI. And then what we've been thinking about, okay, what are the implications for a whole set of economic questions? If we had something like that. I guess one more thing I should say about the timelines, and Ed is right, we've all been blown away by these timelines coming in more and more. I've updated quite a bit. I think it was John Maynard Keynes who said, when the facts change, I change my mind. So and I feel like I'm not the only one. I had a talk with Demis Hassabis, and he himself was surprised, and many other people have been surprised. So it is a genuine updating that we're all doing. And given that updating, instead of 2060 or 2100, when we have to worry about these things, which frankly is kind of off my planning horizon, it's now much closer to our planning horizon. Metaculus does list 2030, the date that Ajay mentioned, as having the set of capabilities. So we economists are going to have to hustle to keep up and start thinking hard about the implications for growth and productivity, innovation, inequality, concentration of power, etc.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so what I wanted to add to this conversation is, I think if we really have machines that reach that milestone of transformative AI, powerful AI, AGI, whatever you want to call it, it's going to imply an economic paradigm change that is probably on par to the change that occurred during the Industrial Revolution, but in a much, much faster timeline. So if we look back at basically the switch from the Malthusian age to the industrial age, what occurred was a fundamental shift in our production technology. The main production technology during Malthusian times, during basically all of the Neolithic, was that we combined land and labor to produce output. And at the time, land was the bottleneck. The human populations multiplied until everybody lived essentially at a subsistence income. And the bottleneck was land. That means land was expensive, land was valuable, land was what conferred power. So the landowners in those societies were typically the most powerful folks. Now, when the industrial age started, the production function changed. We suddenly, and that's the way how we still write down our economic models today, we combined capital and labor. And the beautiful thing about that is, unlike land, capital is reproducible and is regularly reproduced and is accumulated in modern economies essentially ad infinitum. As our technology advances, we accumulate more and more capital, but in some sense, the labor has become the bottleneck. And following the basic laws of economics, if you are the bottleneck factor, then your returns go up. In advanced economies, by some measures, wages have gone up by a factor of 20 since the Malthusian times, so 20 times subsistence incomes. And that's how the industrial age has essentially underpinned the dramatically rising living standards in advanced economies over the past 250 years. Now, transformative AI can reshuffle that again. And if AI reaches the point And Eric, Ajay, and I have just described that the timelines for that are in a plausibly near future. Then our production function will look different again. And all of a sudden, labor is no longer the bottleneck that it used to be. Labor can now be substituted pretty closely by AIs and robots as a physical manifestation. And whenever we need more labor, we can hire another AI or another robot to perform the task. And so in some sense, from a big picture perspective, that scarcity that labor has represented during the industrial age may be gone. And that may fundamentally change our economic structures. It may fundamentally change growth processes. It may fundamentally change income distribution and so on. So what we have done in our research agenda, and I will try to share the correct slides now, is we have put together 8 different categories of questions that will be brought up by these advances. And one moment, where is my sharing function? And those are what we want to focus on for the following part of our presentation. So I thought I will hand the mic over to Ajay to talk about the implications of transformative AI for innovation.
Wonderful, thanks, Anton. So I'm just going to raise 3 points here to hopefully stimulate people's interest in this topic area and give a sense of how much there is for economists to do here. So I'll begin by focusing on 2 primary parts of the innovation process where AI is potentially have very significant impacts on workflow. One is in hypothesis generation, and one is in hypothesis testing. And so we've seen some very significant advances already with the machine intelligence that we have, and of course everything's improving so quickly. But with what we've already got, we've seen things that nobody even conceived of as plausible at the 2017 conference. So for example, in hypothesis generation, one of our colleagues, Sendel Molenthanen, published a paper on a line of research that he's been doing for some time, where he studies the decision that judges make with regards to whether or not to grant bail to criminals or to accused individuals, and so one of the things he finds very remarkable is how much of the variance can be explained just from the picture of the person, of the defendant. And so he develops an AI that effectively identifies from pictures what are the salient elements that are sort of correlated with the likelihood of whether a judge will grant the person bail. And the AI effectively identifies new hypotheses, so hypotheses that have never been presented before. It does this by generating morphs of the pictures that sort of scale from least likely to most likely of the same person to be granted bail. And then a human looks at those morphs and tries to put a word on what the thing is that the AI is trying to tell it is like this latent variable. And so, for example, one of them is a hypothesis around being heavy-faced, and so a heavy-faced person being more their data are more likely to be granted bail. But the important thing was that the AI came up with a hypothesis. Another interesting study that was recently published is a measure of an AI where material scientists type in the features of a material they want. That's the input. And then the AI predicts a candidate compound. And a graduate student at MIT did this study. And
Aidan Toner Rogers, yeah.
Yeah, Aidan Toner Rogers. And his result was so first of all, it's very I really like this study. It's very well measured, and because he was able to do a randomized control trial where it's about 1,000 scientists, and half the scientists got the AI tool and the other half didn't, and he's able to follow their productivity in the period before the treatment. And then when the 500 or so scientists got treated, he then continues to follow their productivity. And the treated scientists get something like a 44% lift in their productivity in terms of discovering new materials. So that's coming from, you can think of that as hypothesis generation, where it's predicting a candidate molecule. And then, of course, they have to go and test it. All right, so in other words, there's a lot of the workflow in hypothesis generation that is being transformed with AI. And I do want to point out how remarkable that is relative to 2017. In 2017, the language people were using was AIs for simple, routine, repetitive work. And if you were to try and describe in 2017, what wouldn't be included in simple, routine, repetitive work, probably the top of the list would be science, and in particular hypothesis generation. Like that's where we think of the most creativity of all. The apex of creativity is in scientific idea formulation. and yet we're seeing AIs now having significant impact right at the very top of the pyramid. Now, next go to hypothesis testing. Now, hypothesis testing in some sense is much more expensive. There's like physical requirements. In other words, you have an idea what material might work. Now you have to go and actually test whether that material will work or not. And there's a series of different AIs that are being introduced along with robotics for hypothesis testing. So some scientists are even exploring what they call these closed loop systems, where an AI will come up with a hypothesis. It will hand the hypothesis to a robot. The robot will then, mix the chemicals and do whatever it needs to do, and then test the hypothesis, and then observe the result. And then based on the result, it will update its hypothesis and then design another experiment and run it. And so you could just get this 24-hour loop. The last point I'll make here, and what I want to point out about the testing is that can be both expensive. In other words, even if we have clever AIs doing things, there's still the physical cost of running those experiments. There's also the time cost. So the cost of, sometimes, like, let's imagine you're doing something in biology, you have to wait to observe the organism and in order to be able to measure whatever the effect is that you're trying to do. And you can imagine in, for example, something like drug development and drug testing, that waiting can be a very long time. And AI can't speed that up. It can attempt to do things to reduce the chance of failure by, for example, testing in simulation. But the last point I wanted to add here on research is that there are some areas of research where we can imagine AI completely closing the loop and accelerating the science at a rate that's very hard to comprehend, and that's in areas of computer science. And that's because it can write the code, it can then test the hypothesis, compile the code, and observe an output, and that all of that can be automated. And it can be done very quickly. So the loops can be very fast. It can think of something, write the code, test the code, observe the outcome, update the hypothesis, and do it again. So lots of iterations very quickly. So there are, in other words, the point I want to make here is in variation across different types of sciences based on how long it takes to get an output from which the AI can then learn to update its hypothesis. So there's a lot a lot of interesting opportunities for transformative AI to have a very significant impact on how we do science and innovation. And as economists, we are just scratching the surface. There's a handful of people, economists, who've been working on this. But of course, the reason this is so important, in my view, it's maybe the most important part of this, is because innovation is at the core of our models on economic growth. And there have been some people being quite, I don't want to say negative, but very skeptical of significant positive economic impact from AI. Probably most notable is Daron Acemoglu, who recently received the Nobel Prize. That he has made arguments that AI is potentially going to have a very limited positive effect. It may have a lot of negative effects because, in his view, it could have very limited impact on the percentage of tasks that are influenced, and even the tasks that are influenced, of a small, reasonably modest fraction of the tasks that can be automated. But he doesn't, in his macroeconomics of AI, a paper he recently published, he dismisses the role of AI in innovation. In other words, he says right in the introduction, doesn't even mention, dismisses the role of innovation. So Eric's going to talk about growth. I'll stay on innovation. My key point here is just innovation as just an economic activity is likely to be significantly impacted by this, and there's a lot of work for economists here. And then furthermore, the role that that's going to play on growth, which Eric will discuss. So Anton, maybe I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Ajay. And indeed, let me hand it over to Eric, who will tell us a little bit about all the questions that the advances in scientific progress, but also the automation by itself will deliver for growth.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to answer all of them. I mean, I see it. We're already more than halfway through. So I'll try to be brief because I do want to get to all the other questions, all the other topic areas. And I want some time for Q&A and discussion. But let me say that I share Ajay, and I think you're Anton's amazement at the progress in innovation and scientific discovery. That by itself is not enough to generate economic growth. It's an important catalyst or precursor to it. But our experience has been that even with the most powerful general purpose technologies, well, first you have to take science and turn it into innovation into technologies, and even very powerful general purpose technologies like the steam engine, electricity, early computers take a long time to turn into economic growth. My early work in the 1980s and early 1990s, I coined the term productivity paradox because people were disappointed with computers not turning into productivity. Bob Solow was advising me on and coined this famous quote that we see the computer age everywhere except in the productivity statistics. So these innovations in AI, I think they're also a general purpose technology, but we need to identify how we can get them to turn into productivity growth. And the reason it takes time is that there are often bottlenecks, or almost inevitably bottlenecks, in figuring out how you update your business processes, develop new products and services, new kinds of human capital. And in a paper that I wrote with Daniel Rock and Chad Severson at the invitation of Ajay and his co-editors for that initial conference, we identified what we call the productivity J-curve, which highlights that as you invest in these complementary innovations and complementary assets that go along with the core technology, that's costly and that can take time. And there may actually be an initial period where productivity is flat or negative until it, at least as we measure it, until it takes off as you start harvesting that. To make it a little bit more intuitive, imagine that you did have a country of genius. You had a bunch of Einsteins. You went to your local grocery store or any of the local stores and you said, hey, good news, we have Einstein here to help you. In fact, we have 1,000 Einsteins here to help you. I think a lot of their local grocers would be like, oh, well, that's nice. Can they sweep? Can they stock the shelves? And they're like, well, no. And maybe the next day they wouldn't get a lot of productivity. And maybe in the next year, eventually, maybe those Einsteins would figure out some things you could do, with pricing or product development or inventory or something that could help that store. but it's not an automatic translation from intelligence into productivity boost. I think it'll be there, but it requires additional work. One of the main goals of an economic program, if I think of our economic program, is to understand better what those bottleneck factors are. What are the things that will become the scarce resources as other ones become very abundant? And how can we loosen some of those bottlenecks? So I do think that we're going to see a big boost in productivity over time. I've made a bet with Bob Gordon that it's going to be much higher in the 2020s than it was previously. It's higher than the Congressional Budget Office. And I think a lot of the official statistics or predictions are lowballing what's going to happen in the coming decade. That's going to have great implications for excuse me, the deficit and ability to deal with healthcare, the environment, poverty, and other challenges. But it will take some time to calibrate a little bit about how big the effects might be. Ajay mentioned Daron's work. He used applications of what we call Hulton's theorem. We also wrote this in our National Academies report, which came out a couple of months ago. And Anton and I, with Martin Bailey, did a very simple version of it. But the gist of it is you look at the number of tasks or sectors that are affected by AI, and you multiply it by how big the effect would be in each of those. So it maybe should just be called Hulton's multiplication. It's a very simple idea. You multiply the areas affected by the size of the effect. In work like the work by Ilandu, Rock, and others, there are estimates that existing technology could affect about 50% of the tasks in the economy. In work that I did with Lindsay Raymond and Daniel Lee and other people have done on coding and elsewhere, we looked at call centers. We found that effects of 14% to 35% were plausible. So if you multiply those two together, you can get something like a 7 to 15% increase in productivity just from the direct application of that across the economy. Now, that you need to spread out over some number of years, maybe 8 to 10 years. So it works out to be perhaps 1 to 1.2 or maybe 1.5% per year. So that's a kind of a back of the envelope of just the existing technology. That's not taking into account any of Ajay's points about additional innovation, which almost surely will come. But even that small number that I just said would be enough to radically change our prospects in things like the budget deficit and economic growth. It would bring growth up to the level we saw in the 1990s or beyond. So I'm hopeful that we'll get at least that level. And that's going to make it easier to solve a lot of other problems. And that may be the most hopeful thing we say today in this call, because I think when we talked in some of the other topics, the news isn't necessarily quite as good, but it's good to start with a relatively good piece of news that I think the pie is going to get a lot bigger in the coming years.
Indeed, I want to follow by talking a little bit about the labor market implications of not the AI we have today, but of the transformative AI that we may have in 3 years or 5 years, or nobody really knows. And what I want to start with is I want to start by clearing up a confusion that I think reigns way too frequently in this debate. We economists as a profession have kind of spent the last 250 years explaining to the non-economists why some level of job disruption, the level of job disruption that we have experienced throughout the Industrial Revolution, is not necessarily a bad thing. So of course, it's painful to the individual, and that's why in advanced economies we have developed safety systems. But throughout most of the industrial age, job substitution, automation, has been followed by new job creation. And that has by and large been the process that has made our economies richer and more advanced. But what I want to point out, this is purely an observation about the industrial age. It's an observation about an age in which labor really was this bottleneck factor that could not be replicated and that was holding back the expansion of output. And if our production technology changes as radically as what transformative AI would imply, then those historical regularities are by no means guaranteed to continue to hold. So in some sense, I think we can be relatively confident that if we have transformative AI, then the share of labor in total output is likely to decline. Now, the big question is the absolute level of wages going to rise or go down? There's a lot of angst throughout society now that AI or the robots may take all of our jobs. And I guess to add a little bit of a positive twist to it, there are actually two economic forces. One is the one that Ajay and Eric have highlighted, that our economies are going to be a lot more productive. But the second force is that transformative AI would kind of, by its definition, have the capability to stand in for the vast majority of jobs and tasks that occupy workers today. And there will be a horse race between those two factors. In fact, in one of my recent papers on scenarios for the transition to AGI, I analyzed that horse race and I showed that depending on the speed of automation versus the speed of complementary capital accumulation, you can have either rising wages or falling wages. And determining the outcome of that is going to be one of the big challenges that we can only speculate about given what we know today. But in a couple of years, it may be one of the first and foremost policy issues that we're facing. Because if labor, as we know it today, is substitutable by cheap machines, we know that in a competitive market, wages of anything that can be done by machines would go down to the cost of those machines. And that may fundamentally challenge our current system of income distribution, which primarily relies on labor. So if that happens, then we will very likely need new frameworks of income distribution, new frameworks to achieve shared prosperity and to make sure that the tremendous benefits that AI may be able to deliver, as what Ajay and Eric have just told us about, are also shared throughout society and arise not just to a few capital owners. So we are already at 3/4 past the hour. What I want to do now is I want to put up the slide with our 8 main themes again. And I want to invite both Ajay and Eric to pick any topic that they want to pick on, both from the Q&A, but also if you would like to follow up on any of the remaining points here in the research questions in our agenda. First, over to you, Ajay.
I'm happy to pass to Eric here, but I'm just reading through the questions now.
Okay. While you do that, let me just briefly pick up on the power concentration one, because it's one that I'm quite concerned about, and it follows very naturally from what you just said, Anton. If and when the technology starts replacing human labor, as I mentioned, that good news, we can get a lot more productivity. The bad news is that wages could fall very low, even to zero in the extreme case. So perhaps we have some UBI or other system for distributing it. My concern is that, currently most people get most of their income from wages, and they have a lot of bargaining power in that if someone refuses to pay them, they can refuse to work. And so there's an equilibrium there where they have some leverage to make sure they get paid. Sometimes people have to go on strike or switch to a new job or whatever to get paid what they think is fair. If people have no economic value as laborers, then their bargaining power disappears. And then that could lead to a real concentration of economic power and ultimately political power. And I do worry about that. The concentration is not just in the AI industry. We've heard about the scaling laws, and maybe DeepSeek is undermining some of those a bit. But I'm thinking about the other 95% of the economy where these technologies may allow a lot of economic decision making, a lot of economic activity to be highly centralized. Think of how Walmart or Amazon is able to know a lot more about local customers' preferences and local production costs than perhaps even the local store owners know. And that centralization can be incredibly efficient, but in a world where there's just a small number of central economic actors, or maybe even just one that produces most of the wealth, is likely to also be one where freedom, democracy, and decentralized power are in jeopardy.
Mhm.
Anton, I'm going to respond to, there's a few questions here on a similar topic, which is on topic number 3 on income distribution and jobs. And I'll respond to it in the form of a kind of a question to Eric, which is, we're still so early in this that there's been very few empirical papers that have carefully measured the impact of AI on jobs. But one of them is this paper that Eric wrote on call center workers. And another one is this paper I mentioned earlier on scientists and material science. And what I find interesting about these papers is that they reported opposing results with regard in terms of distributional impacts. So in other words, especially since the computer revolution, even before that, but this was supercharged with computers, there's quite a bit of research on skill bias technical change. And of course, the basic idea there is that the technology has disproportionately benefited higher skilled people. So higher skilled people have a disproportionate wage gain from technology. And the question with AI was, is this going to amplify that? And Eric's paper came out and said the opposite. It said, no, look what we found, that in the call center setting, that the AI tool, which effectively predicted what a person should say when they're talking to a customer, it benefited everybody, but it disproportionately benefited the lower skilled workers, the less productive workers. They got the biggest boost. And so after Eric's paper and a couple of other papers, some other labor economists rushed out and said, oh, look, AI might rebuild the middle class because it's going to, all of this technology up till now is largely being disproportionately benefiting high skilled, and here's something that benefits low skilled. But then this other paper on the material scientists came out with exactly the opposite result to Eric's. And in their case, the AI benefited all the scientists, but very significantly disproportionately benefited the most productive scientists. And so I don't know if Eric may have some view on why he thinks that the AI worked one way in his study and in that setting, the call center setting, and another way in the scientist setting.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about it a bit. The paper I did with Lindsay Raymond and Danielle Lee, we did find that the less skilled workers, also less experienced workers, did significantly better, about 35% gains. The most experienced and most skilled workers, the gains were close to zero. What seemed to be happening is the LLM was capturing the tacit knowledge of the best workers, making it widely accessible, but just telling back to the best workers what they already knew and what they already heard. So there wasn't much lift there. And other people have found similar things in coding. They found it in management consulting, in sales. So there have been a series of papers now that found similar things. The paper on with the scientists, material science, went the other way. And it was very striking because the best scientists actually had more patents and more new discoveries compared to the less good scientists. There are a couple of hypotheses as to what's going on there. And well, first off, I should just step back and say it's still early days. So I think we should be hesitant about making any generalizations. And I'd love to see more research on this. And there are many differences among the different technologies and studies. But I have two hypotheses about what may be going on. One is that in areas where there's sort of like a ceiling, a right answer, and you need to get to it, almost by definition, the LLM is going to get you to that and not beyond. So with the call center, there's sort of, okay, this is how you change your password or whatever, and once everybody knows that, like how much better can you be updating your password or whatever the other question is. And there are many problems we face where there's sort of like a unnatural ceiling to what you're doing. And I think in those areas, the LLM is going to mostly level up things and bring highly competent capabilities more widely in the population. In scientific discovery, I mean, I don't know if there's a ceiling, but we don't seem to be anywhere near it. So there's lots of room for better and better discoveries. That's one hypothesis. I think that's part of what's going on. The other one is honestly just user interface. There's another study where the results were even more striking. There's a JAMA study that Eric Horvitz and others were in, where there was a group that had used the LLM. There was the LLM answers just straight up with no human involved, and then there was the humans by themselves. Strikingly, when the doctors were working with the LLM, they did worse than when the LLM was just giving the answers unfiltered. So the doctors were adding negative value. Looking at that more closely, I think it's a case of some really bad UI and lack of interpretability. You shouldn't have a doctor actually subtracting from the probability that the LLM gives the right answer unless they just really don't understand what's going on. And I think that happens in a lot of these early systems as well. There's just design that isn't, the humans aren't in a position to gain as much. It may have happened in the scientific discovery one as well. The less experienced scientists maybe were stumbling and not understanding as well what the answers were and what was happening, and weren't able to take full advantage of it. I certainly see that a lot myself, and I think a lot of other people see that when you first start using these systems, there was the Jagged Edge paper by Ethan Mollick and company, and they found that some people, they weren't using the system as well as the way it should be because they just didn't understand it well. I'm hopeful that as people get more comfortable with the technology, they'll be able to do a better job. But in the meantime, it's often the better, more skilled workers that are able to use the tools more effectively. So both of those may be part of what's going on. But either way, it's an important question because as Anton and Ajay, as you both pointed out, this is going to have profound effects on income inequality and income distribution, especially during this transition period before we get to to full, powerful or transformative AI, which may be some number of years as we work through this. It's likely to be a period of significant disruption, and if there's winners and losers, that can cause a political backlash and a lot of other challenges that we saw with other technologies. And so we should be very attentive to doing it in a way that creates not only growth and prosperity, but shared growth and shared prosperity.
Thank you, Eric. So one of the themes that I see in a lot of the questions that have been posted in the Q&A, and thank you all for contributing so prolifically to that, revolves around precisely this question of education. In some sense, the discussion that we just had was about the effects of present-day AI systems. And one of the critical questions is, how will transformative AI change education requirements and change what is useful to educate for, change what skills we want to acquire, what skills we want to teach our students, and so on. And I want to start by observing that this is again an area where we economists have preached for decades now that the hypothesis of skill-biased technological change tells us that more education, I oversimplify greatly, more education is always better. And we should we should tell all our children to get as much education as possible. Now, how will this be affected under transformative AI? Do you want to take a stab at this, Ajay or Eric?
Sure. Well, I'll start here, which is, so far, all of the AI, the 2017 version at our initial conference and volume, and the 2025 AI that we're talking about now, and that's really motivated us to think much more urgently about what we're calling transformative AI. All of it is still computational statistics that does prediction. And whether it's generating language or pictures or predictions of molecular structures, it's all that's. And so the division of labor in my mind is between things that can be accomplished with prediction versus things that require judgment. And I think of judgment as effectively putting weights on different types of errors. And 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 so, when I asked Eric, what does he think the difference is between, like, why does his paper, his call center paper, have the opposite result to the scientist paper? My interpretation was the role of judgment relative to prediction in both of those two job types, and that judgment was a much more significant component in the scientist role than it is in the call center role. And so all that's to say that I imagine a future where in education we are educating on judgment, and so that's what. And so then we have to start thinking carefully of, well, what does judgment mean, and how do you teach it? But like a mental model that I sort of think of is, I teach at a business school, and 40 years ago when people came here, they would accounting was the biggest subject. It's still there, but it's not the dominant one anymore. But at that time, it was the dominant one, and people would come and they would get homework assignments of adding up columns of numbers, or just to practice their adding, because it was such a key part of the job of being an accountant. And then along came spreadsheets, and now there's no more adding or subtract. No accountant has to add or subtract ever again. But there's still lots of accountants. And so what are they doing? They are having the machine do all these calculations, and then they're applying their judgment. And I think that's just in my mind, a useful mental model for thinking about the transition in labor and in educating the labor force on the subjects associated with that, on the types of things that are judgment as opposed to prediction.
And actually, I can definitely see that direction, but I'll say in my experience, frontier language models have become really quite good at judgment as well, for whatever objective we may want to specify it to them.
But you are specifying the objective. That's also judgment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think there's a sort of short-term versus long-term thing, and I concede the long-term is coming in a lot more quickly. I've been amazed at how useful these tools are for helping to helping create customized tutorials for people to learn things very quickly. Tom Mitchell and I have been playing around with some. Sal Khan has a great book, Brave New Words, about using these tools. But two things. One disappointment of Sal's book is that he assumes education is going to be radically changed, but the whole rest of the world will stay the same. He implicitly assumes that. And of course, the need for knowledge in medicine, law, and everything else is going to change a lot. So we have to think about a general equilibrium. And over time, I think that's going to be a very different kind of world. Over time is now much sooner than what I thought just a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Indeed. So we are very close to the top of the hour, and I just want to ask both of you for a quick concluding question. And the question is the following. What is your personal advice to economists who want to become active in this field, in this urgent field of transformative AI? Ajay first.
Well, this will sound very self-serving, but I would encourage you to read this white paper, because in the white paper we're trying to lay out just at a very high level the main categories of research topics, and so I think that's a way to get started. And of course, the 2017 volume is also a good way to get started, because it lays out some foundations, and then you ask yourself, now when AI is much more sophisticated than it was what people were thinking about in 2017, what are the extension to these questions?
Yeah, I would second that. Look, the three of us have all decided to focus our research agenda on this. So reveal preference is, we believe this is important. In fact, I think you can make a good case. It's by far the most important economic question that any of us are going to face. So if you're an economist, you have to ask yourself very hard, why aren't you working on these questions about how transformative AI is going to change the economy and society? Any one of the 8 questions that Anton put up, or others that you may identify. But this is the biggest technological revolution of our era, perhaps ever. And right now, there's a massive gap in understanding the economics of it. And so I encourage you all to join us in trying to address that gap.
Yeah, and what I want to add perhaps is that each of us has accumulated wisdom in our own field of expertise. And if the predictions about how transformative AI are going to come true, then all of the fields of economics are going to be transformed. So no matter if you are, I don't know, a labor economist, an economist studying innovation, an economist studying market power, transformative AI will have implications for that. And so I think there is ample of space for applying your knowledge to the implications of that. And that's, in fact, I believe, a really promising research agenda. So in fact, if the predictions from the leading labs are right, then each of us may have just a few more research projects left before the transformative AI can itself solve all of the research questions better than we can. And I think that makes it more urgent than ever to choose carefully what to focus our energy on. So kind of the challenge that I want to pose to each of you. Imagine you look back in 10 years from now and that transformative AI has already been achieved. What research project that you focused on in 2025 would you be most proud of? What would be the most useful project to help us, the economics profession and society more broadly, to prepare for the transformative changes that are on the horizon? And with that, I
Thanks,
want to
folks.
conclude our webinar. Oh, Eric, you have one more question.
No,
One
no,
more
I have to
comment,
go.
right?
I'm sorry, but thanks very
Okay.
much. I'm late for my next meeting, but it was a real pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Ajay. Just a housekeeping issue. Our next webinar will be on Tuesday, February 25th. It will be a presentation by Chad Jones. And I guess since I'm a native of Austria, let me just conclude by saying I'll be back. Thank you.